Happy Monday morning, everyone, and welcome to Some Stops Along the Way, your podcast that highlights some of the most interesting countries in the world through the lens of my work there, as well as their history, culture, and geopolitics. Glad you could join us today. We're starting on a new country today for the next couple of episodes. I'll get to that in just a minute. But just to let you know, my memoir, Some Stops Along the Way, it's a companion of this podcast, is still available on Amazon. If you want the backstory on a lot of the things that we talked about in the podcast and to read about some really interesting people and experiences, you might want to get a copy of Some Stops Along the Way. As I said, it's available on Amazon. So today we are jumping into the largest country in the world in terms of population, and that is the country of India. Uh, India has roughly 1.4 to 1.47 billion people, and it's a young country. The median age is about 29 years. By population, it's slightly larger than China, which is the second most populous country in the world. But India is so large that it is really considered a subcontinent. Its cities are teeming, and its culture and traditions are rich and varied. It's such a large and diverse country. I've traveled in most of the areas of the country, and you see different cultural norms, different customs, different dialects and languages throughout the country. So we're going to get more into the demographics of India in our next episode and talk about not only its governmental structure, its caste system, its relationship with its neighbor Pakistan, and its relationship with the United States. We'll get into all of that in the second episode, but today I just wanted to share with you some interesting, what I think will be interesting, you be the judge, stories of my work and travels in this on this amazing subcontinent of India. I will tell you that my work in India led me to some of the most interesting experiences that I've ever had. Um, it's just almost head scratching when I think back on them. As a matter of fact, I don't tell these stories very often because quite frankly, someone who doesn't have any perspective about India would likely not believe them. Um, some of them are funny, some are whimsical, but and some of them are sad. And there are some that I won't share. But I do want to share some of my experiences with you today, just as kind of a precursor to the wider discussion we're going to have in the second episode on the history, culture, and geopolitics of this fascinating country. I remember very well my first trip to India. It was in 1998, and I was actually not working in India at the time. I was headed to the country of Bhutan to do a project. But it's a very long flight. I flew from Colorado to Los Angeles to Osaka, Japan to Bangkok, and then Bangkok to Calcutta, where I spent a day and then caught a Druk Airlines flight, which is Bhutanese Airlines flight to Thimphu, Bhutan. But I remember that first trip to Calcutta so well because as we were flying into this city, I began to think about the stories I'd heard of Calcutta in my youth. And I've said before, so if you watch the podcast from the beginning, you know that I was raised by very religious parents. We went to church every time the doors were open. And some of my favorite times at church were when missionaries would come and visit. And I remember so well a missionary from India by the name of Mark Buntain, who visited our church when I was a young boy, maybe 7, 8 years old. Mark Buntain and his wife, Hulda, had gone to Calcutta in the 1950s, just on a short term trip, but fell in love with the country and the people. And this city of Calcutta really resonated with them, and they felt called, they felt led to go there and do something significant for the people. And over the next several decades, until their death, which I believe was in the 1990s, they started hospitals and schools and feeding programs. They poured their own lives out to the people of this city. And I remember hearing Mark Buntain speak and the obvious love that he had for the city of Calcutta, but also the very stark message that he had about the crushing poverty in this city and the size of this city. And so as we were flying in, I looked down and I remember seeing beautiful areas of green space below me. And all of a sudden that green space ended and there was just a large area of the city that looked like a bomb had gone off. It was just black and brown, and it looked like a huge scar on the city. And of course, that was the huge slum area of Calcutta. And so when we landed, I immediately went to my hotel and I asked our driver to take me to the Strand, which is the promenade that runs along the river. And on the way there, we went through some of the most crushing poverty I've ever seen. You need to understand that Calcutta is a city of millions of people. As a matter of fact, its metropolitan area, its wider area, is 15 to 16 million people in 724 square miles. That's around 21,900 people per square mile. Very densely populated. Not the most densely populated city in the world, but one of the most densely populated in India and one of the probably top 10 most densely populated cities in the world. And more than 70% of the people in Calcutta live at or below the poverty line. So as I was walking down the Strand and just observing everything around me, the sights, the sounds, the smells of India overcame me. And it brought back the images, the memories of this missionary, Mark Buntain, and what he had said about this city. And I found that he wasn't overstating the poverty. He wasn't overstating the challenges. But he was not overstating the hopefulness of the people who were smiling, who were very hospitable, even if they were desperately, desperately poor. So that was my introduction to India, was Calcutta. A few years later, I made my second trip to India, and I made several others after that. And this led me to a series of experiences that, quite frankly, if you uh, wrote into a screenplay, it would be, I think, quite a funny comedy. It was like something right out of of Ricky and Lucy, the Lucille Ball show in some ways. So let me just share some of these with you. Of course, anyone who goes to India wants to go to the Taj Mahal. Well, the Taj Mahal is in Agra, India. It's a few hours outside of the capital of Delhi. And during my second trip to the country, I landed in Delhi, went to the hotel, got some work done, and early the next morning, I had our driver take me to Agra to see the Taj Mahal. So we left the Imperial Hotel in New Delhi, and I'll talk more about the Imperial Hotel in just a little while. But we left the Imperial Hotel at about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and I was dog tired from the trip. And so I'll be honest with you, I slept almost all the way to Agra. So we arrive at Agra. I see the Taj Mahal for the first time, which is an unbelievable structure. It's literally one of the wonders of the world. You can't believe it unless you're there. There are many places in the world that you hear about and that you read about, and it sounds so fantastic. But when you go there, you're a little bit disappointed. The Taj is not one of those places. It is absolutely impressive in every single way. If you can just navigate the people, there weren't that many people there that day because A, I went early, and B, it was the off season, so there were not as many people there that day. But I saw the Taj Mahal, enjoyed the day, went back to Delhi. So a few years later, when I went back again to New Delhi for work, Debbie went with me, and I wanted to take her to the Taj Mahal as well. So she asked me, "Is the drive to the Taj Mahal interesting?" And I said, "Oh no, not really. It's not really interesting at all, but the Taj is worth it." And so again, we left early in the morning to begin driving toward um, Agra from New Delhi. It was a different time of year, so it got light earlier. And all the way along the route of this trip, Debbie found fascinating. As a matter of fact, we were no more than 20 minutes outside of Delhi when we're driving down the road, and all of a sudden, Debbie looks up on the roof of a house, and here is a naked Indian man pouring water over himself. And that was just the beginning. There were sights, there were sounds, there were structures, there was beautiful scenery, there were tuk-tuks, there were livestock in the road. There was everything going on. And Debbie looked at me and said, "What is wrong with you? You said there was nothing between Delhi and Agra, that it's a boring trip. And this is one of the most interesting things I've ever seen." So I learned right then, number one, don't sleep through an entire trip just to enjoy the final destination. And number two, what is not interesting to one person may be profoundly interesting to another. So that was our introduction to the Taj. But other experiences that come to mind when I think about my work in India. In New Delhi, especially, virtually in every large city in India, but especially in New Delhi, the traffic is just awful. I mean, you can't even fathom how awful the traffic is. Debbie and I one time stayed out in Gurgaon, which is a suburb of New Delhi. And we're driving into the city because I had meetings and we were actually going to spend a week at the Imperial Hotel and seeing things in Delhi because that was her first trip to India. And Gurgaon is not that many kilometers away from Delhi. I don't have the figure in front of me now, but maybe 8 to 10 kilometers. And it took nearly 3 hours to get into New Delhi because the traffic was just awful. And if any of you that know me, and certainly my wife would tell you, I hate traffic. I hate sitting in traffic. There are a lot of reasons for it. One of the reasons is because in Afghanistan, if you got stuck in traffic, the bad on many occasions, a bad guy would ride up next to you on a motorcycle and blow your head off. And so nobody wanted to get caught in traffic. And so ever since that time, whether it's rational or not, when I get in traffic, I get very, very nervous. And so one day when my driver was taking me into Delhi, traffic was just stalled. I mean, it was absolutely stalled. And I was losing my mind. I was telling him, find an alternate route, turn off this road, do what you have to do, just get me out of this traffic. And he tried to explain to me, Sahib, it's not that easy. There's traffic everywhere, and there's some kind of blockage in the road. Well, there was indeed a blockage in the road because there was a band, a full band, in the middle of the road playing like crazy. Cars trying to go around them on both sides, and this band was in the middle of the street just having a ball, playing their music, happy, tambourines, dancing, clapping, instruments, jamming up traffic for kilometers down the highway. No police, no one telling them not to do it. They were there just doing their thing. That's so India. Oh, the traffic stories in India could go on and on. In Jaipur, one day I was caught in traffic, and it was equally as bad as in Delhi. And usually the traffic's not quite as bad in Jaipur, but the traffic was bad. And again, driver says there's some type of blockage in the road. And as we finally snake our way up, I look up and I see, and I'm not kidding, an elephant. And there's been a traffic accident. A car that hit, and I'm not kidding, an elephant. And this elephant had become irritated and had flopped itself over on the front of this car. So in front of us, with traffic snaked for miles and miles behind us, is this dilapidated car, which was dilapidated before it ever hit the elephant. But this dilapidated car with the elephant flopped over on the the hood, the driver and people trying to coax the elephant off of the car, traffic snarled everywhere, 30 or 40 people around this car trying to figure out how to move the elephant. It was the most hysterical thing that I'd seen. And again, totally India. There were other things that are just totally the Indian experience. My favorite hotel in Delhi is the Imperial Hotel, and it's one of the old colonial type hotels. The the uh, the valets and the concierge still wear the white uniforms and the pith helmets, and it's just a beautiful old hotel, and it sits on a street in New Delhi called Queensway. And you know that India used to be a British colony, and so many of the streets are still named uh, either by British names or they are tied to Britain in some way. And this street was called Queensway. And so I'm at the Imperial Hotel and decide that I need a haircut. So I go to the concierge and I said, "Where can I get a haircut?" He said, "Oh, we have a spa." So I go to the spa and the haircuts were ridiculously expensive. I decided, you know what? There's got to be another option here than spending this much money for a haircut in this five-star hotel. So I go back to the concierge. I said, "Look, I appreciate the fact that you want to push the spa, but is there another place that I can get a haircut? It's not as expensive." He said, "Oh, certainly. Just walk outside of the gate to the hotel and go to your left, and there's a man there who can cut your hair." I said, what are you talking about? Outside the hotel? He said, yeah, outside the hotel, he can cut your hair. I said, will he do a good job? Oh, yes, he'll do a fine job. And so I walked through these beautifully manicured grounds in this hotel, immaculate. I mean, literally, the grass was almost cut to the same height. Beautiful swimming pool and opulence everywhere. And the minute I walk out of the front gate of this hotel, I'd arrived the night before in the dark. So I walk out of the front gate of this hotel, and it is absolute poverty the minute you walk out of the gate. So I look around, I turn to my left, and lined up down the wall of the hotel are some vendors. And two or three vendors past the hotel is this guy who's cutting hair. And so I walk up to him and said, he didn't speak English, but I made the motion. Can you go? Oh, yeah, sure. And so I sat out on the street with all this traffic, this dirt, this dust, outside of this beautiful cloistered five-star hotel, sitting on the street getting my hair cut. That's funny enough. But what's even funnier is while I'm getting my hair cut, I look to my left and there's a guy getting a tooth pulled. There's a dentist out on the street pulling this guy's tooth. And on the other side of him, there is a guy who is fitting someone for glasses. There's an optometrist. So there is a barber, a dentist, and an optometrist all lined up outside, charging a few rupees to desperately poor people who needed a haircut, who needed dental care, or who needed eyeglasses. So Indian that you can't believe it. The Imperial Hotel was the setting for a couple of other really funny instances as well. I encourage you to look up the Imperial Hotel online. It's quite a fascinating place. But so one morning I'm having breakfast at the Imperial, and I love to sit out on their veranda because again, it's a walled. Its grounds are walled, and within those grounds, it is some of the most beautiful scenery you've ever seen. Just palm trees and beautiful grass and swimming pool and fountains and just a beautiful, beautiful place. And I would sit out on the veranda, on the balcony there, and have my breakfast. So I go through the breakfast buffet. I find a nice table outside. The weather's beautiful. I sit my plate down, and I realize I forgot to get some orange juice and coffee. So I leave my plate there. I go in. I get some orange juice and coffee. I come back out, and there is a large black crow sitting on my table, just helping himself to the food on my plate. Well, about the time I see the crow, the waiter saw the crow as well, and he's mortified because this is a very, very nice hotel, one of the nicest hotels in Asia. And he is, pardon me, he's absolutely mortified. So he runs over, he shoos the crow off, and he insists on going and getting me another plate of food, which he does. And that, as funny as that is, that's not the end of the story. Because by this time, he's very irritated at this crow because the crow is harassing people. And so he goes and gets one of the groundskeepers. And he tells the groundskeeper, get this crow out of here. I want this crow gone. So the groundskeeper goes and gets this homemade, it looked like a rake. And he begins swinging at this blackbird, this crow. And the crow is flying, and the guy's running, and he's swinging this rake type thing, trying to hit this crow. And the crow's dodging, it's dropping down, it's going up, and it's playing with this guy. You can almost see it was like a game. And he's swinging and swinging and swinging, and the crow flies over near the swimming pool. So the crow turns, goes over the swimming pool. This guy's running along, swinging this rake. Another groundskeeper has a a hose and he's watering the grass. About the time this guy runs to swing at the crow, the guy with the hose pulls it over around him. The hose comes up. The guy with the rake trips over the hose, misses the crow, goes right into the swimming pool. This is happening during breakfast. Okay. Not even counting all the other nonsense that happened during the day. This happened during breakfast. So you got a meal and a floor show during your breakfast at one of the nicest hotels in the city. Another instance at the Imperial that I always found quite funny. Um, Whenever I had a meeting, I would typically schedule a car at the hotel rather than having a driver come from the office and try to fight traffic to get there and then fight traffic going back. I would simply reserve a car at the hotel and have them take me to my meeting and bring me back to the hotel. So one morning I had a very important meeting at the U.S. Embassy with the United States ambassador, and I had prepared very well for this meeting. It was going to be a little bit of a touchy subject, and so I'd spent a lot of time preparing for this meeting. I'd scheduled a car the day before to retrieve me at to leave the hotel at around 8:30 a.m. to go to the U.S. Embassy. So around 7:45 or so, because again traffic is horrible and you have to make allowances for that. It was between 7:30 and 7:45, and my meeting was at 9 o'clock. But again, you never take chances with traffic. So I go down, tell them who I am, tell the concierge that I reserved a car for this meeting. Concierge looks through his book because doesn't find anything. Looks through his book, doesn't find anything. Finally, he finds it. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And he goes out, spends five or so minutes talking, comes back in, and said, "Mr. McCord, we have a problem, sir." I said, "What's that?" He said, "There's been a mistake, and it's our mistake, and I so apologize. There was a miscommunication between the valet staff and the concierge desk, and all of our cars, all of our normal cars are in use. We don't have one, and we won't have one in time to get you to your meeting." And I said, "Well, this is a problem because this is a meeting with the U.S. ambassador. I have to be on time, and if I miss this meeting, I've got real problems. It took a long time to get it scheduled. I don't want to reschedule the meeting. Is there a solution?" He said, "Hold for just a moment." And so he disappears for around 10 minutes. He comes back. He said, "I have a solution for you, sir." I said, "What is it?" He said, "Well, the only car that we have available to take you to the meeting on time is our VIP car. And usually it's reserved for top government officials, etc. But it's the only car we have, and it's our mistake. So we're going to take you in that car. And so it'll pull out up in front in just a few moments, and you'll get to your meeting on time." I said, "Thank you very much." So a few moments later, a car pulls up outside. I walk out, and here is a white Rolls Royce. This car is like the dream car of anyone who has ever uh, who has ever wanted a luxurious experience. Okay, and here's this historic colonial hotel that's white in itself. Uh, the guys in their white uniforms and their white gloves and their pith helmets. And here's a guy holding open the back door of a Rolls Royce to take me to the United States Embassy, where I am leading an effort that's funded by United States government money, and they are going to take me to the United States Embassy in a Rolls Royce. I said, "Listen, I appreciate this very much, but I cannot roll up in front of the United States Embassy in a Rolls Royce as a U.S. government contractor, even though you're not charging me for this." And I'm not billing the government for it. There's no way that I can roll up in front of the United States Embassy in a Rolls Royce. but it was the only car available. So I got in, we drove, and I told the driver, a very nice Sikh young man, look, stop a block away from the embassy and let me out. He said, why, sir? I'll take you to the door. No, stop a block from the embassy and let me out. So he stopped a block from the United States Embassy, and I got out and walked the rest of the way. And I said, don't go any closer. Stay right here. When my meeting's over, I'll find you. And so I did that. So that was my experience at the Imperial Hotel of taking a Rolls Royce to the United States Embassy. All kinds of fun times associated with that hotel. It was there that I was staying when I was working with um, exiled Tibetans. We had a project to help empower the exiled Tibetan community in New Delhi to gain strength through their association and to do public policy advocacy to promote Tibetan interest to hopefully so that they could increase their economic capacity. And so one morning I was having breakfast at the Imperial with several of the exiled Tibetan leaders in Delhi, and we hit it off quite well. And we did a lot of substantial work over the next weeks together. It was very it was a very rewarding time for me. And the project was actually going on longer, but I couldn't stay because I had an obligation in China. So, but the Tibetans wanted me to stay. Well, if you know much about the situation between Tibet and China, you know that there's a very tense relationship, and these exiled Tibetans were very anti-Chinese, and I did a lot of work in China. I was going from there to China, and so they wanted me to stay and and complete the project. But we already had another consultant lined up that was coming in, and I told them I cannot do this. I just can't. I appreciate you, but I can't stay. I've got another obligation, but I'm going to hand it off to this other consultant. And they said, okay, okay, okay. But I knew they weren't satisfied. And so that afternoon, and when I got back from some other meetings, there was a phone call patched to my room. And I pick up the phone. And on the phone, the voice says, please hold for the representative of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I think it's a joke, right? I think it's one of my friends on the project playing a joke on me. So I'm like, ha ha, funny, funny. Next thing I know, I'm talking to a representative of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, trying to convince me to stay and work with this group, which I couldn't do. I didn't do because I very likely would have never been able to work in China again had I done that, and I'd already made an obligation. But again, things that just don't make sense. Just uh, things that are so India that you can't get your head around them. Some other experiences. Debbie loved India. She was fascinated by it. And when she went there with me when I was working, we had a weekend that we decided to do some sightseeing in Delhi. I wanted her to see some of the sites that had been important to me during my projects there. And one of the things that we decided to do was to take a rickshaw to Old Town. If you've ever been to Old Town Delhi, this is like I'm fairly convinced that if you wash the dirt off of Old Town Delhi, most of the buildings would collapse. The electrical grid is so convoluted that there are just wires everywhere. It looks like wires on top of wires. This place is it's it's old, it's decrepit, it's covered with people, and there's dust and dirt, and sights and sounds and smells, and it's overwhelming, right? But our rickshaw driver, because he saw Debbie had a nice camera, and he inquired if she was a photographer. I said yes. He was determined that she was going to get the um, the great shot of Old Town Delhi. And so he takes us through these back alleys in this rickshaw, finally to this old decrepit building, goes inside, takes us up like 6 flights of stairs in the pitch black, in surrounded by people, literally people coming down the stairs in the dark, bumping into you. We finally get to the roof of this building in the middle of Old Town Delhi. Our shoes, our slacks, they're covered with dust and dirt. We finally get to this roof. Debbie is not happy until we step out on the roof, and it is the money shot. It is a shot that you can't believe of Old Town Delhi, which would never have happened if we hadn't been kind and befriended this rickshaw driver who made less than nothing, one of the lowest castes. But he wanted so much to be hospitable and help us, especially Debbie, get that beautiful shot of Old Town Delhi, which he was very, very proud of because that was his home. And that was something that really made an impression on us because we came from a different world. To us, it looked old, it looked decrepit, it looked like it was falling down. To him, it was home. And he was very proud of it. And he was very proud for Debbie to, to photograph it. Oh, Delhi. So many stories. The first time that I flew into Delhi, I left the airport. There'd been a snafu with our driver. He wasn't there. So I contact my liaison there with who was with the Indian Competitiveness Council. And he says, I'm really sorry. We can't get, the traffic's terrible. We can't get a car to you anytime soon. Pardon me, please. And could you just take a taxi? I said, no problem. I've taken a taxi all over the world, not a problem. So I go out and I get in this taxi. And this taxi is one of the most decrepit taxis I've ever seen anywhere in the world. And believe me, I've seen some decrepit taxis, but it's one of the most decrepit I've ever seen. Literally, as we're driving down the street, there are parts of this car that are falling off in the street. And by the time we got to the hotel, this car had lost part of a bumper. It had lost a fender. We had a fender bender that had knocked part of the fender off and one of the mirrors. It was the most hysterical thing in the world. It was like the Flintstones by the time we got to the hotel. Again, a very Indian experience. The drivers there in India are, I have a great deal of respect for them because I'm telling you, driving in that kind of traffic would be terrifying to any person who is not from there or who certainly not from Asia where a lot of the cities have bad traffic. But in Delhi, traffic is insane. And these drivers can maneuver their vehicles into the tightest spots that you can imagine. So when you found a good driver, you stuck with him. And I had a driver there for most of my projects, a Sikh guy uh, named Hassan. And I had him drive me to the Taj Mahal one day. Went in to see the Taj, and I said, look, I'll find you when I come out. Well, big mistake on my part because I come out and he's driving a white car like almost everybody else. He's Sikh like almost everybody else. I have no idea where this driver is. None whatsoever. So I think about it in a moment and I think, All right, I know his name, so I just jumped up on the wall. Here's this gringo, this white guy, jumps up on the wall, and I say, Hassan! And like 8 guys come right there, all Hassan. Oh, brother, here we go. And but finally, my Hassan said, Sahib, 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 Sahib. And he recognized me, even if I didn't recognize him. And we were able to link up. But then we developed a fast friendship, and we did a lot of things together over my projects in India. In fact, he was driving me in Jaipur the day that the elephant sat down on front of the car, and also the day when we pulled up to a stoplight in Jaipur. And the stoplights work there when they want to, but it was a stoplight. And we stopped there, and I had been doing some work on my laptop in the back seat because we were headed to a meeting, and I routinely worked in the car, and so I wasn't paying much attention. But I hear some commotion. I look up, and I look to my left, and we're stopped at a stoplight. And there's a car on this side stopped, and on the other side, it's a dude on an elephant. There is literally an elephant stopped at the stoplight with a guy on top in the middle of Jaipur. They wait for the light to change, and then the elephant proceeds along with the traffic across the street. Hassab didn't even flinch. I was like laughing my head off. I just, it was just unbelievable to me. I'm going for the camera trying to get a picture of it. It was unbelievable. But that's just a day in the life the of the drivers there. Later that day, another funny instance occurred. We were after our meetings in Jaipur. There was a World Bank consultant that was with us, and he was an absolute, if you'll pardon my expression, ass. He was just not a nice person, condescending to the Indians. Uh, Culture was irrelevant to him. He was a know-it-all. He talked over everyone. He was just a rude, boorish person. And we'd gone through all day listening to his rhetoric. And we were all just tired of it. So at the end of the meeting, the local host want us to go to the local palace, the ancient palace that's in Jaipur. So we first go to the Hanging Palace, which is beautiful in itself. It's a palace that's out in the middle of what looks like a lake, and it looks literally like it's sitting on top of the water. And then they took us to another ancient palace. It was up on a hillside, and you had to ride. They had elephants there that you would ride to go up, or you could walk. Well, I was not going to ride an elephant because I don't believe in that. I think that the only time you should see an elephant is in the wild, not in a zoo, which is, by the way, animal prison, not made up with all kinds of makeup like in these elephants were at this fort, with the green and the pink and the purple, and people riding them on top so they didn't have to walk up to this fort. I was absolutely not going to do that. It offends me. No. But this World Bank consultant, of course, he's not going to walk up there because he's way too important for that. And so they begin to hoist him up on top of this elephant. So they just about have him up on top of this elephant, and he's a rather large man anyway. They almost have him up on top of this elephant, and a car comes by, and a child had run out in the street in front of this car, and the driver hit his horn, and the elephant was startled and shifted, and the World Bank consultant loses his balance. He goes over the top of the elephant, falls off the other side of the elephant down into a hedgerow, and rolls down the hill. Well, everyone is standing there in shock. The local hosts are absolutely just apoplectic. They run to get him. Well, he wasn't hurt very badly, scraped up a little bit. He wasn't hurt, and I lost it. I began laughing so hard because here's this guy that's been just a pain in the neck all day long, and the last image that I have of him was it going into that hedgerow and rolling down the hill, and the local host running after him to see if he was okay. I believe that karma exists, and I believe that that was karma. In fact, I told our Indian host that karma, and they thought that was quite funny. I worked with some interesting people there as well. A lot of really interesting consultants. I worked with a uh, a lady from Russia. Her name was Natalia, who was a very good consultant and a good friend of mine. But she was very much India bothered her a lot. The poverty bothered her. The number of people bothered her. She just wasn't comfortable being out in public. But I finally talked her into one weekend going to the Red Fort in Delhi, which is a beautiful ancient fort there. And outside of that fort, there was a line of people. And I still don't know why. There was this long line of Indian nationals standing outside of the fort getting ready to go in. Maybe it was to buy tickets. I don't know. We already had tickets, so I don't know. Maybe that was it. But as we were walking up there, there was a snake charmer, and he had this cobra coming up out of the basket. And I tell Natalia, "No, you want to see this? Oh, no, 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 I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it." I said, "Oh, come on, just get a little bit closer. We'll go around to the other side behind the snake so you can see it." So we go around there, and so you have this line of Indians. Then you have Natalia, and I'm standing by her, and you have the snake charmer. So she's looking at the back of the snake and saying, "That's weird. It's very weird." And all of a sudden, the snake pivots itself like this, and he's staring straight. The snake is staring straight at her, coming up and just staring her right in the face. And it startled her so badly that she jumped backwards. She hits the last Indian in this line, and literally it looks like falling dominoes. This guy falls, he hits the next guy, he falls, and a whole line of Indians just went down in unison like a stack of falling dominoes. Again, I laughed so hard that tears were running down my face. That wasn't the only run in we had with the consultant and the snake. There was another consultant that I worked with there, a, an American lady um, who was very enchanted by the snake charmer, but she made a big mistake because you don't take a picture of a snake charmer unless you're going to pay that snake charmer. So she took a photo, but then she didn't want to pay. And it was a few rupees. It was nothing, really. But for whatever reason, she didn't want to pay. And so this guy picks up the basket with the snake in it, and he begins running. And she starts running. And my endearing picture of her sprinting down this sidewalk, being chased by the snake charmer with the cobra going like this, and he's chasing her down the sidewalk, and she's literally pulling rupees out of her pocket and throwing them over her shoulder so he'll quit chasing her. Very, very funny stuff that happens like nowhere else in the world. Another consultant I worked with, a man, uh, a European guy. We were down near India Gate, which is a monument there in Delhi, and there were a group of B girls there, business girls, prostitutes that were in that frequented that area. Well, of course, they saw two white men, and here they came. So the European consultant doesn't realize I know who they are, but I didn't have the chance with all the chaos to say, hey, look, this is what's going on. And so before I could say anything, here come these women. Well, it doesn't register with him who they are. Uh, and for some reason, in his mind, he thinks they're like uh, people begging for money. And so he takes money out of his pocket and he hands it to the first lady that approaches him. And the rest of them just go wild. I mean, he handed her a significant amount of money. He was being very generous, and they realize this is a lot more money than they usually receive. And these women just start pushing and shoving each other and grabbing, and they're grabbing him. They're trying to grab the money. They're grabbing the girl with the money. They're pushing and shoving each other. Mayhem ensued. And I said to him, congratulations, you just started a fight among B girls. And when I explained the situation to him, he was mortified. We walked off finally, and the girls were still fighting. You had 12 to 13 B girls, all in an absolute uproar over this money that he had given when he didn't realize who they were. Things that only happen in India. The last one I'll share with you. When Debbie and I were there together, of course, she is 5'7" or so, blonde hair, long blonde hair, and the Indians were very enamored with her, so they all wanted their picture taken with her. So everywhere we would go, whether it be Qutub Minar or India Gate or Red Fort or Taj Mahal, wherever we were, they wanted their picture taken with her. Not with me. They wanted their picture taken with her. They wanted me to take the picture. So here I am, I think I'm this uber cool consultant working in India doing all these things. They could care less about me. They wanted the picture taken with the blonde-haired white woman. And so all over India, everywhere we went, they were trying to pull Debbie into pictures, and she was always very gracious about it. But I felt like I was her traveling photographer the whole time. Those are some experiences that I had in India, and I'll leave you with a last one, and then we will pick up here at our next episode with the history, culture, and geopolitics. But my last trip to India, I spoke at a competitiveness conference. It was sponsored by the India Competitiveness Council, which was run by a very good friend of mine. And so he had asked me to come and do a keynote on the first day. So I go to one of the nice hotels there in New Delhi to attend this conference and make this keynote presentation. So it was a competitiveness conference, and there were a lot of people there that were disciples of someone called Dr. Michael Porter, who is from Harvard, and he developed a competitiveness model called cluster competitiveness, which I do not believe in. I've seen it fail more often than succeed. But for a long time, USAID was so in love with this model and with Michael Porter that they kept forcing cluster competitiveness on every private sector program, whether it made sense or not. And in most cases, it didn't, and it didn't work. But he was the cluster guy. So there are a lot of his quote unquote disciples from around the world there who really think that he's a great guy and that cluster competitiveness is the greatest thing since sliced bread. So I decide to use a little humor at the beginning of my presentation. So I am introduced, I walk up to the podium, and I start something like this. Great to be here in New Delhi. I want to thank the Indian Competitiveness Council for having me, and I am very pleased to be able to do the keynote on the first day of this competitiveness conference. I know many of you are disciples of Dr. Michael Porter in cluster competitiveness. I will tell you that I'm not as much a disciple, and there's a reason for that. I don't know if cluster competitiveness works or not. I don't know if it makes the economies of countries competitive. But what I do know is that it made Michael Porter competitive because he made $50 million. So whether it works or not, Michael Porter has proven that this theory can make you competitive because it sure worked for him. Well, I got some laughs around the room, but as people are laughing and I'm soaking in the moment, I look down on the front row, and right in front of me on the front row is Christian Kettles, who is Michael Porter's deputy, and who was the next speaker. He literally spoke right after I did. So here I take a hatchet to Michael Porter, his deputy sitting on the front row, and he's the next speaker. Now, fortunately, he thought it was funny. He made light of it in his speech, but he thought it was funny, and we shook hands afterwards and went our ways. But again, I learned there in India that always know who's in your audience. And if you're going to try to be funny, make sure that you know who you're speaking to. India. I could go on and on. But on our next episode, we're going to talk more about the history, politics, and geopolitics, and culture of this fascinating country. And I'll share some more stories with you as well. Until then, have a great week, and we'll see you next Monday on some stops along the way. Have a good week.